In this lesson, I'll be surveying what each of these two worldviews believes about various science fields if they're applied universally. So keep in mind, I'm mainly contrasting a young Earth creationist worldview with like a macroevolution is everything atheistic, one might consider Dawkinsian worldview. Though I will be mentioning, other perspectives of the creation and macroevolution worldview throughout. Just keep in mind that's not the primary focus. In this part 2, we'll go over life sciences. We'll look at genetics, taxonomy, neuroscience, gerontology, ecology, xenology, and end with looking at ethology. When it comes to genetics, which is the study of mainly biological heredity, the almost universal macroevolutionist perspective of phylogeny says that there is a universal genetic monogeny for and genealogical connections between all organismal kinds, with macroevolution of genetic molecules producing one kind from another. So then all organisms are a part of one universal gene pool. Now, all macroevolutionists believe in phylogeny to at least some degree. They believe one kind can come from another. But I have met a macroevolutionist who didn't believe that there was a universal genetic monogeny. It's interesting. The creationist perspective, which is universal to all of them, says, and of phenomenology, says that there is a genetic polygyny for and therefore genealogical separations between all organismal kinds, because to produce one kind from another would require violating at least two scientific principles, so the only evolution that exists is variation within kinds. There's no biological macroevolution. And each kind is a part of its own separate and unconnectable gene pool. When it comes to taxonomy, which is the practice of identifying and classifying organisms into groups called taxa within a ranked hierarchy of organization, the macroevolutionist perspective of systematics has taxonomy based on phylogeny, and it's seeking to make the taxonomic hierarchy of classification a copy of the phylogenetic tree. However, the creationist perspective of true Linnaean taxonomy, or Linnaean taxonomy, however you pronounce it, has taxonomy based on phenomenology and similarities between kinds, just like how Carolus Linnaeus himself based it, instead of on supposed genealogical phylogenetic relationships. When it comes to neuroscience, which is the study of the nervous system, and neurology is specifically medical neuroscience, by the way. The macroevolutionist perspective of evolutionary neuroscience, which is more held by atheists than theists, says that mental faculties, think like reasoning and memory, all brain functions, and the entirety of nervous systems have macroevolved over a long time, going from simplest to most complex form. And there's another macroevolutionist perspective that has massive overlap and also two more held by atheists called neural Darwinism. Won't get into its details for sake of time. The creationist perspective, however, says that macroevolution of nervous systems would violate either the principle of correlation of parts and make the nervous system useless, fail, and kill the organism, or violate the principle of natura non facit saltus, or in English, nature makes no leaps. Therefore, the different kinds of nervous systems must have been designed and created separately in the various kinds. And also, mental faculties are more than just biology. When it comes to gerontology, which is the study of the natural and social aspects of the aging process, the sort of Dawkinsian macroevolutionist perspective that's not held by all of them, which is the evolution of aging, assumes that aging is a naturally selected trait. Possibly because it has some reproductive benefit we don't know about, at least for certain creatures, or it just isn't bred out because of low mortality rates, or just has some other explanation for why natural selection wouldn't get rid of it. However, the creationist perspective that's held by essentially all of them says that aging can't be explained by natural selection, especially because all the evolutionary theories as to why it would be naturally selected has some pretty clear holes in it, Also, aging being an in some way initially existing and neutral or beneficial natural process doesn't really fit what's been well established in other disciplines outside of natural science, like in theology. And really, ask anyone who is many a decades old, they'll probably tell you, yeah, when it comes to biology and society, aging is neither neutral nor beneficial. To ecology, which is the study of organisms and their environment, the extremely common macroevolutionist position of evolutionary ecology assumes that ecological interactions like mutualism, thinking those benefit organism relationships, and competition and predation, as well as connected abiotic phenomena like temperatures and precipitation amounts, are results of macroevolutionary processes. For example, coevolution making symbiosis, such as mutualism. Some macroevolutionists would disagree with the abiotic parts, but definitely would agree with the biotic parts. The creationist perspective, however, says that ecological interactions, such as food webs and non-sentient plants mimicking their pollinators' characteristics, which I have a video in the description on that. It's absolutely fascinating. These things being non-physical and so complex and specific that they must have been sapiently designed. If you don't know what I mean by sapiently, go see the Great Chain of Being lesson. And also, some of these things being vital for survival means that there is no way they could have been slowly established over long periods and came out so fine-tuned without first collapsing on themselves. It comes to xenology, which is the study of the theory that there are or can be organisms and or other biological phenomena that originate from outside of Earth. The perspective held by most macroevolutionists is that the existence of any sort of organism, including ones with animal or human mental faculties or other biological phenomena originating from outside of the Earth, is completely plausible. Hence why some macroevolutionists theorize that macroevolution on Earth started from organic matter coming here on an asteroid. And except for the macroevolution parts, possibility of such things are held by a great deal of creationists too. However, for other creationists, most of them being YCs, any theoretical science for organisms and the related originating from outside of Earth is nothing more than pure imagination. So from what we do know about biology, this reveals that there's no environment suitable for sustaining life outside of Earth, unless somehow there is an organismal kind that doesn't need to abide by most of the rules of biology that we do. And the existence of ET organisms, especially ones with any sort of sentience, would require some theological considerations too, because for the theist, we're not just talking about science here. It comes to ethology, which is the study of animal behavior, the macroevolutionist perspectives of sociobiology and behavioral ecology say all behaviors observed in ecology, particularly spite, self-sacrificing care for others, parenting, sibling conflicts, insect societies, mating, and mate selection, are the results of macroevolutionary natural selection coincided with the biological, namely genetic and neural, macroevolution. The degree to how much of this is true varies between macroevolutionists, and it claims that a certain protein, for those who care, called transcription factor FAV, being genetically removed, causing behavioral change, which is true, supports this. The creationist perspective, however, says that because of the falsehood of naturalism, all behaviors can't be explained merely by biology, and definitely can't result from macroevolutionary process since, it doesn't exist. And it would be too slow to function anyways. And you see, genes and brain function are just part of it, but that's far from the whole story. And there are plenty of theistic macroevolutionists that agree with that to some degree.